Today we're going to finish our discussion on antebellum reform movements. Let's begin by talking about the women's rights movement. In the antebellum reform movement, women were fighting for suffrage. We know that suffrage means not to suffer, but it means the right to vote. You remember that funny video we watched last class. So, women during this time period were essentially property of their husbands. They couldn't vote, they couldn't own property if they were married, they didn't have rights over their children, they couldn't testify in court, they had to ask their husband in order to file a complaint in court, and they couldn't initiate a divorce. During this time, many women were abolitionists, which means they fought for the rights of blacks not to be slaves, or to get rid of slavery. So at the World Anti-Slavery Conference, two women, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, were there on behalf of other women suffragists around the world who also believed in abolition. Excuse me, these two ladies were kicked out of the World Anti-Slavery Conference, and that's when they decided to form their own movement. So they split with the abolitionists and had the Seneca Falls Convention in Seneca Falls, New York, where men and women came together and created a document called the Declaration of Sentiments. This Declaration of Sentiments was modeled after the Declaration of Independence, in which the women listed all of the rights that they were being denied by men. This document was very influential and very important during this time and was one of the major achievements of the antebellum women's rights movement. I also have up here as a famous woman during this time who fought for women's suffrage was Sojourner Truth, and she gave her famous speech, "Ain't I a Woman?" This speech talked about the fact that black women were doubly discriminated against, not only because of their race, but also because of their gender. The temperance movement. During this time period, many people wanted to reform the nation's policies on the use of alcohol. They wanted people to abstain or to stop alcohol use altogether. With a massive influx of German and Irish immigrants in the 1840s, between the 1820s and the 1840s, many people feared that these new immigrants would bring their culture of drinking to America and it would deteriorate our country. One such family that were very, very adamantly opposed to drinking alcohol was the Beecher family, and they campaigned and advocated for the temperance movement. Their efforts and the American Temperance Society, both of their efforts led to alcohol consumption being significantly reduced during this time period. Really quickly, I want to show you a little graph here, okay? Were the temperance reformers effective? So you can see here, around 1820, we see the peak of alcohol consumption, and then by 1860 or so, we see the amount of alcohol consumed significantly drop. So you tell me, were they effective? Okay, back to our slide. The last group we'll talk about tonight are the Transcendentalists. The Transcendentalists wanted to move away from organized religion. They believed that one could reach God through nature and didn't necessarily need to go to school to learn about, didn't need to necessarily go to church to learn about God, but they could understand God through nature. Two very famous Transcendentalists were people like Henry David Thoreau, who wrote a famous book called Walden, and Ralph Waldo Emerson. The opposite of Transcendentalism is Romanticism, which basically says that people have to experience life and reality is what we need to interact with to understand God. A famous romanticist would be Nathaniel Hawthorne. You may remember him in some of his writings from your English class. So tonight for homework, you're just filling in your chart using this information, and in class we'll continue to learn about different reform movements during the antebellum period.